Chapter 7 of the Death of Ivan Ilyich. How it came to pass during the third month of Ivan Ilyitch's illness, it would be impossible to say, for it happened little by little, imperceptibly. But it had come to pass that his wife and his daughter and his son and their servants, and their acquaintances and the doctors, and most of all, he himself, all were aware that all interest in him for other people consisted now in the question how soon he would leave his place empty, free the living from the constraint of his presence, and be set free himself from his sufferings. He slept less and less. They gave him opium and began to inject morphine. But this did not relieve him. The dull pain he experienced in the half-asleep condition at first only relieved him as a change, but then it became as bad, or even more agonizing, than the open pain. He had special things to eat prepared for him according to the doctor's prescriptions, but these dishes became more and more distasteful, more and more revolting to him. Special arrangements, too, had to be made for his other physical needs, and this was a continual misery to him. Misery from the uncleanliness, the unseemliness, and the stench, from the feeling of another person having to assist in it. But just from this most unpleasant side of his illness there came comfort to Ivan Ilyich. There always came into his room on these occasions to clear up for him the peasant who waited at table, Gerasim. Gerasim was a clean, fresh, young peasant who had grown stout and hearty on the good fare in town, always cheerful and bright. At first the sight of this lad, always cleanly dressed in the Russian style, engaged in this revolting task, embarrassed Ivan Ilyich. One day, getting up from the night-stool, too weak to replace his clothes, he dropped onto a soft low chair and looked with horror at his bare, powerless thighs, with the muscles so sharply standing out on them. Then there came in with light, strong steps Gerasim in his thick boots, diffusing a pleasant smell of tar from his boots, and bringing in the freshness of the winter air. Wearing a clean hempen apron and a clean cotton shirt, with his sleeves tucked up on his strong, bare young arms, without looking at Ivan Ilyich, obviously trying to check the radiant happiness in his face so as not to hurt the sick man, he went up to the night-stool. "Gerasim," said Ivan Ilyich faintly. Gerasim started, clearly afraid that he had done something amiss, and with a rapid movement turned towards the sick man his fresh, good-natured, simple young face, just beginning to be downy with the first growth of beard. "Yes, your honor?" "I'm afraid this is very disagreeable for you. You must excuse me. I can't help it." "Why, upon my word, sir," and Gerasim's eyes beamed, and he showed his white young teeth in a smile. "What's a little trouble? It's a case of illness with you, sir." And with his deft, strong arms he performed his habitual task, and went out, stepping lightly. And 5 minutes later, treading just as lightly, he came back. Ivan Ilyich was still sitting in the same way in the armchair. "Gerasim," he said, when the latter had replaced the night-stool, all sweet and clean. "Please help me. Come here." Gerasim went up to him. "Lift me up. It's difficult for me alone, and I've sent Dmitri away." Gerasim went up to him. As lightly as he stepped, he put his strong arms round him, deftly and gently lifted and supported him, with the other hand pulled up his trousers, and would have set him down again. But Ivan Ilyich asked him to carry him to the sofa. Gerasim, without effort, carefully not squeezing him, led him, almost carrying him, to the sofa, and settled him there. "Thank you. How neatly and well you do everything." Gerasim smiled again, and would have gone away, but Ivan Ilyich felt his presence such a comfort that he was reluctant to let him go. "Oh, move that chair near me, please. No, that one, under my legs. I feel easier when my legs are higher." Gerasim picked up the chair, and without letting it knock, set it gently down on the ground just at the right place, and lifted Ivan Ilyitch's legs onto it. It seemed to Ivan Ilyich that he was easier just at the moment when Gerasim lifted his legs higher. "I'm better when my legs are higher," said Ivan Ilyich. "Put that cushion under me." Gerasim did so. Again he lifted his legs to put the cushion under him. Again it seemed to Ivan Ilyich that he was easier at that moment when Gerasim held his legs raised. When he laid them down again, he felt worse. "Gerasim," he said to him, "are you busy just now?" "Not at all, sir," said Gerasim, who had learned among the town-bred servants how to speak to gentlefolks. "What have you left to do?" "Why, what have I to do? I've done everything. There's only the wood to chop for tomorrow." "Then hold my legs up like that, can you?" "To be sure I can." Gerasim lifted the legs up, and it seemed to Ivan Ilyich that in that position he did not feel the pain at all. "But how about the wood?" "Don't you trouble about that, sir. We shall have time enough." Ivan Ilyich made Gerasim sit and hold his legs, and began to talk to him. And strange to say, he fancied he felt better while Gerasim had hold of his legs. From that time forward Ivan Ilyich would sometimes call Gerasim and get him to hold his legs on his shoulders, and he liked talking with him. Gerasim did this easily, readily, simply, and with a good nature that touched Ivan Ilyich. Health, strength, and hardiness in all other people were offensive to Ivan Ilyich, but the strength and hardiness of Gerasim did not mortify him, but soothed him. Ivan Ilyitch's great misery was due to the deception that for some reason or other everyone kept up with him, that he was simply ill and not dying, and that he need only keep quiet and follow the doctor's orders, and then some great change for the better would be the result. He knew that whatever they might do, there would be no result except more agonizing sufferings and death, and he was made miserable by this lie, made miserable at their refusing to acknowledge what they all knew and he knew, by their persisting in lying over him about his awful position, and in forcing him, too, to take part in this lie. Lying, lying, this lying, carried on over him on the eve of his death, and destined to bring that terrible, solemn act of his death down to the level of all their visits, curtains, sturgeons for dinner, was a horrible agony for Ivan Ilyich. And, strange to say, many times when they had been going through the regular performance over him, he had been within a hair's breadth of screaming at them, "Cease your lying! You know, and I know, that I'm dying, so do, at least, give over lying!" But he had never had the spirit to do this. The terrible, awful act of his dying was, he saw, by all those about him, brought down to the level of a casual, unpleasant, and, to some extent, indecorous incident, somewhat as they would behave with a person who should enter a drawing-room smelling unpleasant. It was brought down to this level by that very decorum to which he had been enslaved all his life. He saw that no one felt for him, because no one would even grasp his position. Gerasim was the only person who recognized the position and felt sorry for him, and that was why Ivan Ilyich was only at ease with Gerasim. He felt comforted when Gerasim sometimes supported his legs for whole nights at a stretch and would not go away to bed, saying, "Don't you worry yourself, Ivan Ilyich, I'll get sleep enough yet." Or, when suddenly dropping into the familiar peasant forms of speech, he added, "If thou weren't sick, but as 'tis, 'twould be strange if I didn't wait on thee." Gerasim alone did not lie. Everything showed clearly that he alone understood what it meant and saw no necessity to disguise it, and simply felt sorry for his sick, wasting master. He even said this once straight out when Ivan Ilyich was sending him away. "We shall all die, so what's a little trouble?" he said, meaning by this to express that he did not complain of the trouble just because he was taking this trouble for a dying man, and he hoped that for him too someone would be willing to take the same trouble when his time came. Apart from this deception, or in consequence of it, what made the greatest misery for Ivan Ilyich was that no one felt for him as he would have liked them to feel for him. At certain moments, after prolonged suffering, Ivan Ilyich, ashamed as he would have been to own it, longed more than anything for someone to feel sorry for him, as for a sick child. He longed to be petted, kissed, and wept over, as children are petted and comforted. He knew that he was an important member of the law courts, that he had a beard turning gray, and that therefore it was impossible. But still he longed for it. And in his relations with Gerasim there was something approaching to that. And that was why being with Gerasim was a comfort to him. Ivan Ilyich longs to weep, longs to be petted and wept over. And then there comes in a colleague, Shebek, and instead of weeping and being petted, Ivan Ilyich puts on his serious, severe, earnest face, and from mere inertia gives his views on the effect of the last decision in the Court of Appeal, and obstinately insists upon them. This falsity around him and within him did more than anything to poison Ivan Ilyitch's last days. Chapter 8 of the Death of Ivan Ilyich. It was morning. All that made it morning for Ivan Ilyich was that Gerasim had gone away and Pyotr the footman had come in. He had put out the candles, opened one of the curtains, and begun surreptitiously setting the room to rights. Whether it were morning or evening, Friday or Sunday, it all made no difference. It was always just the same thing. Gnawing, agonizing pain never ceasing for an instant. The hopeless sense of life always ebbing away, but still not yet gone. Always swooping down on him that fearful, hated death, which was the only reality, and always the same falsity. What were days, or weeks, or hours of the day to him? "Will you have tea, sir?" He wants things done in their regular order. In the morning the family should have tea, he thought, and only said, "No." "Would you care to move on to the sofa?" He wants to make the room tidy, and I'm in his way. I'm uncleanness, disorder, he thought, and only said, "No, leave me alone." The servant still moved busily about his work. Ivan Ilyich stretched out his hand. Pyotr went up to offer his services. "What can I get you?" "My watch." Pyotr got out the watch, which lay just under his hand, and gave it him. 8:30. Are they up?" "Not yet, sir. Vladimir Ivanovitch," that was his son, "has gone to the high school, and Praskovya Fyodorovna gave orders that she was to be waked if you asked for her. Shall I send word?" "No, no need. Should I try some tea?" he thought. "Yes, tea. Bring it." Pyotr was on his way out. Ivan Ilyich felt frightened of being left alone. How keep him? Oh, the medicine. "Pyotr, give me my medicine." Oh, well, maybe medicine may still be some good. He took the spoon, drank it. No, it does no good. It's all rubbish, deception, he decided, as soon as he tasted the familiar, mawkish, hopeless taste. No, I can't believe it now. But the pain, why this pain, if it would only cease for a minute? And he groaned. Pyotr turned round. "No, go on. Bring the tea." Pyotr went away. Ivan Ilyich, left alone, moaned, not so much from the pain, awful as it was, as from misery. Always the same thing again and again, all these endless days and nights. If it would only be quicker. Quicker to what? Death, darkness. No, no, anything better than death. When Pyotr came in with the tea on a tray, Ivan Ilyich stared for some time absent-mindedly at him, not grasping who he was and what he wanted. Pyotr was disconcerted by this stare. And when he showed he was disconcerted, Ivan Ilyich came to himself. "Oh yes," he said. "Tea. Good. Set it down. Only help me to wash and put on a clean shirt." And Ivan Ilyich began his washing. He washed his hands slowly, and then his face, cleaned his teeth, combed his hair, and looked in the looking-glass. He felt frightened at what he saw, especially at the way his hair clung limply to his pale forehead. When his shirt was being changed, he knew he would be still more terrified if he glanced at his body, and he avoided looking at himself. But at last it was all over. He put on his dressing gown, covered himself with a rug, and sat in the armchair to drink his tea. For one moment he felt refreshed. But as soon as he began to drink the tea, again there was the same taste, the same pain. He forced himself to finish it, and lay down, stretching out his legs. He lay down and dismissed Pyotr. Always the same. A gleam of hope flashes for a moment, and then again the sea of despair roars about him again, and always pain, always heartache, and always the same thing. Alone it is awfully dreary. He longs to call someone, but he knows beforehand that with others present it will be worse. Morphine again, only to forget again. I'll tell him, the doctor, that he must think of something else. It can't go on. It can't go on like this. 1 hour, 2 hours pass like this. Then there is a ring at the front door. The doctor, perhaps. Yes, it is the doctor, fresh, hearty, fat, and cheerful, wearing that expression that seems to say, "You there are in a panic about something, but we'll soon set things right for you." The doctor is aware that this expression is hardly fitting here, but he has put it on once and for all, and can't take it off, like a man who has put on a frock coat to pay a round of calls. In a hearty, reassuring manner the doctor rubs his hands. "I'm cold. It's a sharp frost. Just let me warm myself," he says with an expression, as though it's only a matter of waiting a little till he's warm, and as soon as he's warm he'll set everything to rights. "Well now, how are you?" Ivan Ilyich feels that the doctor would like to say, "How's the little trouble?" but that he feels that he can't talk like that, and says, "How did you pass the night?" Ivan Ilyich looks at the doctor with an expression that asks, "Is it possible you're never ashamed of lying?" But the doctor does not care to understand this look. And Ivan Ilyich says, "It's always just as awful. The pain never leaves me, never ceases. If only there were something." "Ah, you're all like that. All sick people say that." "Come now, I do believe I'm thawed. Even Praskovya Fyodorovna, who's so particular, could find no fault with my temperature. Well, now I can say good morning." And the doctor shakes hands. And dropping his former levity, the doctor, with a serious face, proceeds to examine the patient, feeling his pulse, to take his temperature, and then the tappings and soundings begin. Ivan Ilyich knows positively and indubitably that it's all nonsense and empty deception, but when the doctor, kneeling down, stretches over him, putting his ear first higher, then lower, and goes through various gymnastic evolutions over him with a serious face, Ivan Ilyich is affected by this, as he used sometimes to be affected by the speeches of the lawyers in court, though he was perfectly well aware that they were telling lies all the while, and why they were telling lies. The doctor, kneeling on the sofa, was still sounding him, when there was the rustle of Praskovya Fyodorovna's silk dress in the doorway, and she was heard scolding Pyotr for not having let her know that the doctor had come. She comes in, kisses her husband, and at once begins to explain that she has been up a long while, and that it was only through a misunderstanding that she was not there when the doctor came. Ivan Ilyich looks at her, scans her all over, and sets down against her whiteness and plumpness, and the cleanness of her hands and neck, and the glossiness of her hair, and the gleam full of life in her eyes. With all the force of his soul he hates her. And when she touches him it makes him suffer from the thrill of hatred he feels for her. Her attitude to him and his illness is still the same. Just as the doctor had taken up a certain line with the patient which he was now not able to drop, so she too had taken up a line with him, that he was not doing something he ought to do, and was himself to blame, and she was lovingly reproaching him for his neglect, and she could not now get out of this attitude. "Why, you know he won't listen to me. He doesn't take his medicine at the right times. And what's worse still, he insists on lying in a position that surely must be bad for him, with his legs in the air." She described how he made Gerasim hold his legs up. The doctor smiled with kindly condescension that said, "Oh, well, it can't be helped. These sick people do take up such foolish fancies, but we must forgive them." When the examination was over, the doctor looked at his watch, and then Praskovya Fyodorovna informed Ivan Ilyich that it must, of course, be as he liked, but she had sent today for a celebrated doctor, and that he would examine him and have a consultation with Mihail Danilevitch. That was the name of their regular doctor. "Don't oppose it now, please. This I'm doing entirely for my own sake," she said ironically, meaning it to be understood that she was doing it all for his sake, and was only saying this to give him no right to refuse her request. He lay silent, knitting his brows. He felt that he was hemmed in by such a tangle of falsity that it was hard to disentangle anything from it. Everything she did for him was entirely for her own sake, and she told him she was doing for her own sake what she actually was doing for her own sake, as something so incredible that he would take it as meaning the opposite. At 11:30 the celebrated doctor came. Again came the sounding, and then grave conversation in his presence and in the other room about the kidney and the appendix, and questions and answers, with such an air of significance, that again, instead of the real question of life and death, which was now the only one that confronted him, the question that came uppermost was of the kidney and the appendix, which were doing something not as they ought to do, and were, for that reason, being attacked by Mihail Danilevitch and the celebrated doctor, and forced to mend their ways. The celebrated doctor took leave of him with a serious, but not a hopeless face. And to the timid question that Ivan Ilyich addressed to him while he lifted his eyes, shining with terror and hope, up towards him, was there a chance of recovery? He answered that he could not answer for it, but that there was a chance. The look of hope with which Ivan Ilyich watched the doctor out was so piteous that, seeing it, Praskovya Fyodorovna positively burst into tears as she went out of the door to hand the celebrated doctor his fee in the next room. The gleam of hope kindled by the doctor's assurance did not last long. Again the same room, the same pictures, the curtains, the wallpaper, the medicine bottles, and, ever the same, his aching, suffering body. And Ivan Ilyich began to moan. They gave him injections, and he sank into oblivion. When he waked up it was getting dark. They brought him his dinner. He forced himself to eat some broth. And again everything the same. And again the coming night. After dinner at 7 o'clock, Praskovya Fyodorovna came into his room, dressed as though to go to a soiree, with her full bosom laced in tight, and traces of powder on her face. She had, in the morning, mentioned to him that they were going to the theater. Sarah Bernhardt was visiting the town, and they had a box which he had insisted on their taking. By now he had forgotten about it, and her smart attire was an offense to him. But he concealed this feeling when he recollected that he had himself insisted on their taking a box and going, because it was an aesthetic pleasure, beneficial and instructive for the children. Praskovya Fyodorovna came in satisfied with herself, but yet with something of a guilty air. She sat down, asked how he was, as he saw, simply for the sake of asking, and not for the sake of learning anything, knowing indeed that there was nothing to learn, and began telling him how absolutely necessary it was, how she would not have gone for anything, but the box had been taken, and Ellen, their daughter, and Petrushef, the examining lawyer, the daughter's suitor, were going, and that it was out of the question to let them go alone. But that she would have liked much better to stay with him, if only he would be sure to follow the doctor's prescription while she was away. Oh, and Fyodor Dmitrievitch, the suitor, would like to come in. May he? And Lisa? Yes, let them come in. The daughter came in full dress, her fresh young body bare, while his body made him suffer so. But she made a show of it. She was strong, healthy, obviously in love, and impatient of the illness, suffering, and death that hindered her happiness. Fyodor Dmitrievitch came in too in evening dress, his hair curled à la Capoule, with his long sinewy neck tightly fenced round by a white collar, with his vast expanse of white chest and strong thighs displayed in narrow black trousers, with one white glove in his hand, and a crush opera hat. Behind him crept in unnoticed the little high school boy in his new uniform, poor fellow, in gloves and with that awful blue ring under his eyes that Ivan Ilyich knew the meaning of. He always felt sorry for his son. And pitiable indeed was his scared face of sympathetic suffering. Except Gerasim, Ivan Ilyich fancied that Volodya was the only one that understood and was sorry. They all sat down. Again they asked how he was. A silence followed. Lisa asked her mother about the opera glass. An altercation ensued between the mother and daughter as to who had taken it, and where it had been put. It turned into an unpleasant squabble. Fyodor Dmitrievitch asked Ivan Ilyich whether he had seen Sarah Bernhardt. Ivan Ilyich could not at first catch the question that was asked him, but then he said, "No, have you seen her before?" "Yes, in Adrienne Lecouvreur." Praskovya Fyodorovna observed that she was particularly good in that part. The daughter made some reply. A conversation sprang up about the art and naturalness of her acting, that conversation that is continually repeated and always the same. In the middle of the conversation Fyodor Dmitrievitch glanced at Ivan Ilyich and relapsed into silence. The others looked at him and became mute too. Ivan Ilyich was staring with glittering eyes straight before him, obviously furious with them. This had to be set right, but it could not anyhow be set right. This silence had somehow to be broken. No one would venture on breaking it, and all began to feel alarmed that the decorous deception was somehow breaking down, and the facts would be exposed to all. Lise was the first to pluck up courage. She broke the silence. She tried to cover up what they were all feeling, but inadvertently she gave it utterance. "If we are going, though, it's time to start," she said, glancing at her watch, a gift from her father, and with a scarcely perceptible meaning smile to the young man, referring to something only known to themselves, she got up with a rustle of her skirts. They all got up, said good-bye, and went away. When they were gone Ivan Ilyich fancied he was easier. There was no falsity. That had gone away with them. But the pain remained. That continual pain, that continual terror made nothing harder, nothing easier. It was always worse. Again came minute after minute, hour after hour, still the same and still no end, and ever more terrible the inevitable end. "Yes, send Gerasim," he said in answer to Pyotr*s question.